Finance 2016-17 budget authorization to publish notice of hearing. The proposed 2016-17 district budget will be shared with the board at tonight's meeting. The 2016-17 notice of hearing is provided in Appendix 9. It is recommended the board approve the publication of the 2016-17 notice of hearing that will set the annual budget hearing for August 22nd, 2016.
Welcome.
Welcome.
First time by yourself. This is a good thing.
This is a little overwhelming. Good evening, President Logan, Superintendent Allison, and members of the board. I had to ask if that was me, so I'm still definitely in the new status. I'm pleased tonight, though, to present to you our balanced budget proposal for fiscal year 2017. I think last week, or last board meeting, make an analogy that I felt I should still be in my honeymoon period. I'll say that this week I feel I've had a shotgun wedding. I've skipped the honeymoon altogether, and I'm ready to fix you your first dinner, and I just hope I don't burn it. So that'll be the it for my wedding analogies. I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Freeman for doing all the heavy lifting on this budget. It is certainly through his efforts that we're here tonight. And I have a whole new appreciation for him as I've worked on this in this past week. And certainly for Dee Grunder, our budget director, and her staff. Just an amazing job that they've done. Before we get started on the slides, I did want to just cover again that we do have a balanced budget to present for you tonight. It is an estimate. A budget is an estimate. It is based on a set of known facts and expected revenues and expenses at a given point in time. You all spent months hearing of expected cost increases, and then we proposed cuts to cover those cost increases based on what we knew at the time, which were that revenues generally would be flat and that expenses were going up. With the late decision on equalization and the finishing work we've done on the budget forms, we do know that some of the revenue projections have changed. And what we've done is we've reflected those changes in this balanced budget so that the board has the maximum authority it needs as we go forward, especially during the times of financial uncertainty at the state level and not knowing what the school finance formula will look like as we go into next year. So just an overview of what we're going to cover tonight. State aid funding has increased in some areas and it has decreased in others. The recent decision to restore equalization, thank you, Mike, sorry. You fix me up here.
My husband and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. The first meal I cooked for him was cream of wheat, and it was very lumpy. And we stayed married 50 years, so we expect to see you for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you. I needed that encouragement. As we were saying, the recent decision to restore equalization did provide for an increase in capital outlay, and we'll discuss that in further detail as we move forward. As I indicated, the budget development began months ago with the identification of some cost increases that we needed to address. $12 million to the healthcare fund, over $10 million in utilities, textbooks, property insurance, and transportation costs. And then the very painful work of looking for corresponding cuts to offset those basically commenced at that point. And the $22.7 million of budget cut recommendations are reflected on our budget as in order to balance the budget. But on the revenue side, we did want to start and look at the general state aid first. Our total general state aid expected increase is $1.6 million. That is primarily due to two components in the general state aid calculation. The first being virtual state aid. We have budgeted an increase in virtual for about $1 million. The virtual and new facility state aid are the two components that still have a weighting to them, and we are anticipating an increase of FTE in virtual of about 70 FTE components. And then we also, with the closure of, or the outsourcing of Town East and Town West, we do expect to collect some revenues related to credits, and that amount will go up for fiscal year 17 as well. So we are anticipating $1 million in virtual. For that program, though, that funding is limited to the virtual program. It will not be available for other spending outside of the virtual program. New facilities state aid, we've budgeted a $1.6 million increase here. Again, weighted primarily due to Southeast High School, but the completion of other bond projects as well. New facilities weighting is typically a 2-year weighting aid component, but given the fact that we don't know what the school finance formula will look like, we're just looking at this as for this year only. We did lose over proration state aid. The over proration concept originally was that if the statewide assessed valuations would increase, the 20 mills would generate more dollars for schools. I think we were flat, and we're not getting any proration for this year, so it is not in the budget at all. So that really is a decrease for us in about 1.2. We budgeted it last year. We didn't anticipate it coming through, and this year it's not in the budget at all.
Which I would point out, as we talk about the budget that you all will approve, it's on a maximum legal allowable budget. And oftentimes individuals get confused in what that budget authority number is to what our actual expenditures. So this is a great example. In last year's budget, we budgeted this, though we did not tie any expenditures to it because we thought the likelihood of getting it was about 0. But that budget you approved had to show that had we received it, we would have then had the authority to spend it. So there will be some components tonight as we get there that Ms. Willis and I will try to point that out, that while we may not anticipate actually receiving that revenue, we still need to include it in the budget just in case we do, so that there's the authority when we receive it to be able to actually spend it and allocate it on our students.
Okay, moving forward, if we look at a total state aid comparison, last year's actuals to this year's budgeted, again, we're anticipating that $1.6 million increase in general state aid. We are budgeting an increase in the LOB, the supplemental general state aid, of $5.8 million. But if you recall from our previous meeting we're maxed at $111 million in the LOB, so this increase in funding will go to property tax relief, and you'll see that reflected in our final mill levy calculation, which we'll cover here in just a few minutes. Special education aid, it's down slightly, primarily because the amount per teacher right now is down $250 per teacher. That may change as the final numbers come in for the state. The CAPERS aid budgeted at a $10 million increase, but again, the 15-16 actual is a little misleading. If you recall, the fourth quarter CAPERS payment was not funded, and we did not make it. So out of the actuals, that was actually budgeted at closer to $39 million. So we are budgeting for 4 payments going into fiscal year 17. Now, it would not be unheard of for us to miss another fourth quarter payment, that the state might not give us that fourth quarter again, and that would be pushed to fiscal year 18. The extraordinary needs fund aid we're anticipating an increase of about $319,000. We did apply for and were approved to receive $686,000 of extraordinary need funding. However, it is contingent upon the sale of the Bioscience Authority, and we'll talk about the details of that here in just a second. Then finally, the capital outlay aid. We are budgeting an increase in capital outlay of $4.9 million due exclusively to equalization. So our total state aid increase, we're looking at $23.2 million. And I think that's important to note because I'm sure that number will be talked about. The schools are getting $23 million more. But if we look at this next slide, we can kind of take that apart just a little bit and see what's really available for use.
Susan, I guess this is one of the examples I wanted to show. Last year, the CAPERS aid, the budget would have shown probably closer to $39 million than the 28. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So this is one of the weaknesses when we have to compare actual to budget. It shows a $10 million increase, which again, you know, the folks are going to say, hey, you increased it $10 million. Well, we really didn't. It was because the state reduced it by 10, but we have to, you know, compare actuals to budget. And so, and again, we can't spend it if we don't budget it. But if we budget it, doesn't necessarily mean the money will come in. So, it's kind of that catch-22. So I think it's one of the difficulties of a budgeting process that we have to help people understand. So I guess I wanted to point that out. That's really half of the 23 right there.
Right.
So.
Right. That's exactly right. So if we look at that $23.2 million figure, first thing that needs to come off is the LOB aid, because again, that's not new money. That's property tax relief. So that will not be money that we can spend. The virtual state aid is new money, but it's very limited to the virtual program. So for general availability, we'll take that off as far as the purpose of this slide. The CAPERS aid, just as Mr. Rogers indicated, that is not available for general spending. It is strictly a flow through. We get it, we turn it around, we send it back the same day. So that really is a reduction in our total increase. The extraordinary needs increase, again, that's very contingent upon a set of circumstances occurring, which we don't know at this point if that will occur. We've got it in the budget, but there are no expenses tied to it at this point either. We're going to wait to see if that comes in.
And we will approach the extraordinary needs funding as we did last year, not knowing if we'd receive it, not tying expenditures at this point. At the point in time we do receive the funding, Dr. Chance is ready to move forward with providing the additional support that those dollars can provide. What it allowed us to do was add some resources, primarily for our refugee students second semester, and then be able to provide a summer program so that we could expend those funds within the budget year. So that's how we'll approach it again this year. The Bioscience Authority, the goal is, and nothing is set in stone, that the state hopes to have proposals later this fall, and we're probably looking at the December-January timeframe before we'd know if the sale of the Bioscience Authority exceeded the $25 million, and there's some other caveats to some of that money. So really it's got to go in the range of, I've seen estimates anywhere from 30 to 35 million to be able to provide for the extraordinary needs. If you'll remember, as part of the solution for the equity, the Extraordinary Needs Fund was swept in order to fund that. So that 0.25% that was taken from every school district to fund extraordinary needs got swept to pay the equity piece, with the idea that it would be replenished if the Bioscience Authority sells for enough money. So there's a lot of dominoes before we can see that extraordinary needs, and the timing of all this at the earliest will be toward the end of 16, and it may be into 17 before we have a real grasp on whether we'll receive those funds or not.
Ms. Akins?
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Allison. I think one of the things I just want to be really clear about, make sure I understand, is because we're budgeting it, because maybe we'll get it, but we're not giving students, so if we have extra students between now and the time we get the money, we're not adding any extra support for them in the classroom until we get the money. So we're allowing the budget authority if the state gives the money, but because we don't have the money, we can't spend it. So as additional students come to us from these refugee camps or different areas as they're resettled here, we have no additional resources to provide them, which means we aren't hiring staff to help them. We're swelling the classroom for those students. We're not able to give them that the services that they need. So sometimes I think when we talk about budgets and all of that, it gets big numbers, but what really matters is in the classroom, we don't have the resources to give teachers or the people to put in those classrooms to help the additional students we're getting because we don't have the money. So until we get it. So maybe in the spring, we'll be able to help those students, those extra students. In the meantime, we're asking our staff to work harder with the resources that they already have.
So taking into account all the limitations on certain funds and the funds that are not generating any real spendable monies, we're left with an increased state aid figure of $5.35 million, 4.9 of which is capital outlay. So the weighting, the new facility weighting and the virtual aid accounts for part of that, offset by the overproration figure. But generally, what you're looking at is an increase in capital outlay.
And as a reminder, capital outlay has some specific qualifications around our ability to expend that. So the capital outlay resolution that the board passed that follows the state statute then provides the parameters in which the way we can spend those dollars. They cannot just be moved for any purposes or spent on any purpose. It has to fit within that resolution guideline.
We've talked about the extraordinary needs funding just a little bit, and you're exactly right. We estimate 50 more refugee students in addition to the 83 enrolled since November, all of who have educational and social needs far beyond the needs of a regular student. And so we will be anxiously waiting for the sale of the Bioscience Authority. Again, if it's less than $25 million, there is no revenue available. So what does this mean for our mill levies as we look forward to fiscal year 2017? And we had estimated, I think, around a 2.2 decrease at the last meeting. The final figures show an overall decrease of 2.643 to the mill levy. General fund is staying flat at 20 mills. The supplemental general LOB levy is decreasing 1.685 mills due to equalization. Capital outlay fairly flat at 8 mills. The bond and interest we were able to adjust. We did get more state aid and bond and interest, so we were able to bring that down just a little bit. And the special assessment, if you recall, was a tax levy to pay for the sewers and waters and streets with the new Southeast High School. We feel we have levied that enough tax that we'll be able to pay that bill in full, so that levy is going away for 17. Thus, we're overall able to lower the tax levy, which will save the taxpayer of that $100,000 home around $30. Just a quick look at the impact of equalization on the levy over the past few years. You can see in 13-14 we were up over 57 in the mill levy. With equalization coming back in 14-15, that levy dropped to 53.73. As we lost equalization, it went back up. And then as we've regained equalization, it's coming back down. And I believe we were looking at some of the figures earlier that now we're at a levy very similar to where we were even in 2009-10.
Mr. Rogers?
Susan, when you look at those mill levies, the general fund mill levy, the 20 mills, doesn't change at all. That's set by the state, and that is now calculated as a state effort, not a local effort, even though it comes from local taxpayers. That was one of the legislature's responses to saying they gave more money. The supplemental, the capital outlay, and the bond and interest will fluctuate if we have a higher assessed value. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But it's different than the city and county because ours, other than the capital outlay, the supplemental and the bond and interest, as that assessed value goes up, that mill levy can go down because it gets spread out over more people, because it's all based on a formula
Right.
or what our bonded interest is. So really, under a city and county where the mill levy or the assessed value goes up, they could lower the mill levy just because it generates more taxes, more income. That's different for us. So I guess I wanted just to point that out, that some of the folks that think just because the mill levy stays the same, if their property value goes up, they're going to pay more in taxes. You know, they are, but not based on what we do at ours, other than the capital outlay as the only one. So,
That's correct.
and I was just looking for perspective. When I joined the board, my first budget in 2001 was 54.92 mils, and today's 53.6. So it's about a 1.3 mil drop over those 15 years. Now it's gone up and down
Right.
during that period of time, but all that's been primarily because of games sometimes that the legislature has played, or what's happened there with the funding formula.
Right.
So, thank you.
Just a quick look at our unencumbered cash balances over the past few years. You can see, starting with the July 1st, 2013 balance, up through our last balance at July 1st, 16, that generally we are decreasing our cash balances. We did put an estimate as far as what we absolutely had to have in cash balances at 7/1/17, and the items we have to have would be the $36.8 million of bond and interest, the $34 million in insurance reserves, $10 million in contingency, $10 million in special education, and $11 million in kind of some other funds, gifts and grants, nutrition services, which needs that money as we go into the beginning of the school year. There's usually a little bit in capital outlay. That's kind of our bottom, if you will, as far as items we have to have in order to start a school year if aid was not available. Because the bond and interest, we know we have fall payments and we don't get that aid until later in the school year. Same with the special education. Those payments aren't made until October, so we have to get those through those first few months. And knowing the contingency reserve is already pretty razor thin, 6 working days worth of contingency reserve. I think my mother told me I needed 3 months in savings, so that for me looking at that, it's like, okay, I guess we'll see how we do here.
I do want to point out, this is a topic that comes up in Topeka and elsewhere, and oftentimes what happens is folks look at the unencumbered cash balance and they make the assumption that that means it's unbudgeted. So that is similar to having $100 million sitting in your savings account. And as you can see, you can't spend the bond and interest. You're not going to be able to spend the insurance reserve. Really, the only item there is the contingency reserve. And I hear over and over, well, you've got these unencumbered cash balances. You need to spend those. And you can see what's happened over time, that we do utilize now to the point where what we really have in our unencumbered cash is the minimum amount we need for cash flow to be able to function as a business. And the idea of just take this, and if you took a portion of it, you'd be able to provide raises across the board at X amount or whatever, would lead us to exactly where our state is now, which would be on the verge of bankruptcy, borrowing and bonding, which we do not have the option to do. So that advice is something I hear on a fairly regular basis, is about as bad as fiscal advice as you could possibly get for the stability of our school district. But again, it's that idea that unencumbered means unbudgeted. And that is absolutely not true. As you can see, we've budgeted a significant portion of that cash just to be able to make it through our cash flow issues, pay the bills, and proceed with what we need to do to run the school district.
May I just follow up a little bit with that, because I've heard several of our people who are running for re-election or for Topeka say Wichita has $100 million in unencumbered money, with the caveat that we can use this. And I think we just can't say enough that of all that $101 million that's there, we have $10 million, which is 6 days' worth of expenses. And that's it. That's our total savings account. If we would have one really bad storm, we would be in real trouble. So we don't have money that's just sitting in our bank that we're hiding away and we're not giving it to teachers or anybody else. And we try to make that, you have done an excellent job of trying to make that very clear here.
The
Thank
reality
you.
of it is you could spend the cash as is often suggested, but it means we default on our bonds. We can't pay our health insurance claims. We've been unable to provide the required services for special ed. Those are the real life results of doing exactly what a number of folks suggest, because they don't understand the budgeting process, or again, and I'm beating a dead horse, the idea that unencumbered cash is not utilized and budgeted as part of the budget process and the cash flow aspect.
Okay, so kind of to wrap up this presentation, tonight was the establishment of the public hearing date, which will be August 22nd. The budget will publish in the newspaper this Thursday. And so administration is recommending that the board establish 6:00 p.m. August 22nd as the public hearing for the 16-17 budget.
And again, as a reminder, that published budget is the legal maximum budget. It does not mean expenditures. It's the legal maximum budget authority for the school district. And as particularly even the way the form is set up, as you know from the past, the actual to budget always creates a disconnect for folks that don't follow this and understand it just by virtue of the process, looking at saying, well, they're actual to what they're proposing in the legal maximum budget. Their budget's going up $23 million, and that's not the case as we walk through tonight. But that's the process we have to follow, and the legal forms that we have to publish and that you will approve.
Once we publish, we could reduce the budget. We can't raise it. So that's why we're going in with that legal max. Any other questions?
You need are there questions? Because we do need a motion tonight to help publish this. Mr. Rogers?
I move that we take the recommended action and approve the publication of the notice of hearing.
It has been moved by Lynn and seconded by Jeff. Is there discussion? Please cast your vote. You have a vote of 7-0 to publish the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you.